All right, so now today we're going to start looking at the auto rigging process so that we can essentially do what we just did in 4 or 5 weeks in about 30 minutes to an hour. Once you get this process down, we can kick out a rig fairly quickly, again using an auto rigger. Now, you can find a lot of different plugins and scripts and things that will automate a rig for you. I know there's a few I've gotten off of Creative Crash that work fairly well or decently for a free plugin or script. The one that we're going to use today is a paid plugin by Anzavin Studios called the Setup Machine 3. They used to have a face machine as well that would allow you to create a fairly complex facial rig for facial animation, but they no longer support it. I guess they just had a hard time or difficult time getting it to work with newer versions of Maya. So as far as I can tell, they've dropped it altogether. Now this is a paid plugin, so you'll only be able to use it here in the labs. I know it's here in 137 and then upstairs in 254. I'm not sure if it's in 213 or not, but you can at least access it from these two labs. So we'll talk about activating the plugin and then setting it up with our character. But again, it's by a company called Anzavin Studio. If you want to check out the website and some of the documentation that goes along with it, I would recommend doing so. So, if you load or go to the main page here, it'll talk about the Setup Machine 3. On the left-hand side, there's a manual that you can download that'll walk you through the use of Setup Machine. Let's see, download. So if we go here, there are different installers. So there is a TSM3 installer here that works with all versions of Maya up to 2019, and you may be able to install that on your personal computer in order to get your rig up and running or working if you want to animate with your rig once you're done. So again, that's Anzavin Studios. Let's now start looking at setting up our project in preparation for the setup machine. So let's go ahead and minimize this. And I'm going to start by making a new project. So we'll go to File. Let's go down here to Project Window. I'm going to do New, and let's give it our naming convention here. So we'll go crawl Zachary underscore, and I'm going to call this project AutoRig. Rig. And then let's save it into the M drive here. And let's hit accept. And then hopefully when you did the rig from scratch, you set it up or you set up a scene file where your character rig is already clean, or the geometry, and ready for rigging. So I should still have my file. I'm going to go grab it and stick it into my scenes folder. So let's come in here, and so this is my kid rig start file. I'm going to go ahead and take this and I'm going to stick it into my auto rigs scenes folder here. And let's go to File, Open Scene, and I'm going to go ahead and open this up. Don't save. And so again, this should be already cleaned up and ready for rigging. I'm going to go ahead and just double check a few things before I do start setting this up for rigging. I do still have some of my display layers over here that I don't need, so I'm going to go ahead and delete these just by right-clicking and going to Delete. And let's see, I want all of my geometry in a display layer. I'm going to go ahead and delete all these and then just grab all of my geometry and add it to a new display layer. I'm going to call it Kid Geo Layer. We'll hit save. Also want to make sure that all the history is deleted off of this. The transforms are frozen and the pivots are centered. It's going to be really important that your pivots are centered. We're actually going to do the eyes a little differently than we did your rig from scratch. So with the rig from scratch, we used an aim constraint and then parented the eyes to the rig. With this, it actually gets skinned to the rig, and its rotation is based off of a joint that we set up for the eyeball itself. So if we do not have the pivot centered for these, they will not skin or animate properly. So let's just make sure we're being clean about this. I'm going to grab all my geometry. Let's go up here and go to Edit. I'm going to go to Delete by Type and tear this menu out. And then I'm just going to click down the list and hit all of these until I've cleaned all the history off of them. All right, and let's go up to modify. Let's freeze their transformations, and then let's go back there and do center pivot. I'm gonna check my eyes real quick to make sure their pivots are actually center. Cool. All right, and then I'm gonna save this real quick. So we'll go to File, Save Scene As. And I'm just gonna save over this file. And so now I'll always have a clean version of this file that I can go back to if we really mess something up with the AutoRig. I can always come back and start from scratch. All right, so like I mentioned previously, the setup machine is a plug-in, and we're going to need to activate it in order for us to be able to get it into our interface and usable. Now, I did set this up already in the previous class, so I've already got it activated and loaded here. So if you look up here at the top, I have the TSM3 or the Setup Machine 3 menu up at the top. This isn't always positioned in the same place, and sometimes you actually have to be under the rigging submenu to even see it. So there, the menu is in the center, but it's going to have all the same menu options. But we're going to pretend like I haven't activated this already. So if this is your first time using the plugin, to turn it on, what you'll want to do is go to Windows, go down to Settings and Preferences, and go to the Plugin Manager. And then we're going to scroll towards the bottom of this list. And what we're looking for here, and these are alphabetical, so if you go to the T's section, we're looking for this item labeled TSM3, so again, the Setup Machine 3, and you want to make sure you turn on Loaded and Auto Load. So let me go ahead and turn those off. And so if this is your first time turning this on, just be patient with it. It's kind of slow, so when I go ahead and click this, it'll actually spin the wheel for a moment. And eventually what should happen once it's done loading is it will pop up a dialog box. Now again, I've already activated this, so it's not going to pop up on mine, but it's going to pop up an options box asking you or requesting for a serial number. So to get that, it's on Astar. So if we go to Astar, we'll go to Classwork, Crawl, and let's see, we'll go to Classes, Hour folder, and then we're going to go to week 12. And inside there is a text document labeled serial. If you open this up, it's going to have the activation key or the serial number for the plugin. And you can get this one of two ways. You can either just drag over this and copy it, or if you're watching this on YouTube or the video off of Astar, if you just pause it or pause the video, you can type in the serial number, and it does have to have the hyphens or the dashes there in order for it to work. But you'll just copy this into that dialog box and hit OK. And then I can't emphasize this enough. This serial is only to be used in the labs here. For the setup machine, we only have enough licenses to cover these labs or these seats. So please don't share or distribute this key anywhere. So let me go ahead and close this. So like I said, once you hit loaded, it'll pop up that dialog box. You'll hit paste, paste that code in, and then hit OK. Once it closes that window, you should be back to this screen, and where it says auto load, I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. I'll just verify that both of those are checked, and then I'll hit close. And again, if you go to the rigging submenu, we should have this TSM3 dialog box with all of the setup machine options available to us. So again, like I said, auto rigging, one of the benefits of auto riggers is it saves a lot of time up front. So like I said, once you get this process down, you could probably kick out a rig in about 30 minutes to an hour. Like I said, there are other scripts that you can get that'll do the same thing or similar. So there are a few that I've gotten off Creative Crash that work fairly well, especially for a free auto rigging software. So like I said, one of the pros is it's really quick and easy to kick a rig out. They'll do this a lot in industry if they really need a quick, simple rig. It saves them a lot of time to do this with an auto rigger versus doing it from scratch. One of the benefits, again, like I said, it kicks out a rig fairly quickly, but there is sort of a downside to it, and it's that you're kind of limited to the options that are given to you through the auto rigging software. Now, Setup Machine is fairly versatile, so there are a lot of options in here that allow you to get some of the parts and controls out of our rig that we would want, but there are again some limitations to what it can do, and so if you need more complex or specific controls or different types of movement out of your rig that we can't get out of Setup Machine, that's when it is beneficial to rig it from scratch or by hand, because there's more customization behind it. It is slower, but again, if you need a certain type of performance out of your rig, it might be better off just to do it by hand. Sometimes you can maybe use a combination of the two, so you can get the basic rig out of the auto rig and then adaptively add what you need after the fact. Yeah, there's some pros and cons to this, but like I said, one of the great things about this is just it's really quick to kick out a rig. So under the menu here, it's broken up into categories. So this first third here, going from create parts down to on mirror body parts, all of these menu options are going to be relative to creating the body parts or components to our rig that we need. By default, or if we haven't started setting this up yet, you'll notice that a lot of these items are actually grayed out. These won't become available to us until we've set up or blocked out our major rig components. Once we get those in place, then all these other options will become available to us. If we go to create parts in here, there are a few different options. So the first two are going to automate an entire rig for you based on your selection. So there's a biped, so we can get a basic biped out of this, and it's going to give you 2 arms, 2 legs, and all the stuff we would expect to see out of a biped character. There's a quadruped, so if you want to do a 4-legged animal or creature or whatever, we could automate that, and it's again going to give you all the body parts we would really need for a quadruped character. Now, beneath that, you're going to have individual parts. So you're going to have an arm, leg, spine, head, and all those sorts of things. This gives you a little more customization. So if maybe your rig doesn't conform to a standard biped or quadruped, or let's say you need to add additional body parts or appendages to, let's say, a default biped or quadruped, we can actually build a rig piece by piece and start attaching all these things together. Let's say you're doing a biped that has 4 arms. Well, we can create an additional set of arms and attach it to the rig or the biped and have a 4-armed character. So there is a lot of versatility to the Setup Machine 3. It's probably one of the best auto riggers out there that you can get. Yeah, if we wanted to customize this even further with additional body parts, we get them all out of this list. And then the rest of these options below. So again, like I said, most of these are for setting up the initial body or rig. Down below, we have various functions that allow us to control the widgets. So the widgets, we haven't talked about those yet. We'll get to those here in just a second. But we'll use the widgets to block out the body parts to tell it, where our arm, legs, and all that kind of stuff is at. But all these menu items will be specific to that. This next little category is how we specify our geometry. Once we're done setting up our widgets, we will need to tell Setup Machine what needs to be skinned to our rig. And so what we'll do is we'll select all of our geometry and use this function here to set it. And then when we go to hit rig, it will attach our geometry automatically to our rig for us. And then this last option here for rig, this is the final option. So once we're done setting everything up, we'll hit rig, and then it's going to attach our geometry to our rig for us. So we'll start here at the top, and I'm going to go up here to create parts, and I'm going to do a biped, and I'm going to click on the biped options box here. And so we're going to need to specify a few things here. So mirror X or mirror axis, by default, we're going to want X. And then this is going to be really important. And maybe I should have mentioned this when we were cleaning up our geometry. But hopefully you've maintained this practice from the original rig anyhow. Your character should be aligned symmetrically here. So if we were to switch to an orthographic front camera. So again, if you go to panels, orthographic front, our character should be center here to the vertical line, and then if we look at our feet here, they should be resting on top of the center horizontal grid line there as well. So you'll want to make sure that's all set up before you freeze your transformations and center your pivot. When we're looking at it from the front orthographic view, your character should be facing the camera. So that means your character is facing positively in the Z direction. And so what that would do is this mirror axis, this right-hand side, or it's technically our character's left, this is positive X, and then over here on the left-hand side, or the character's right, this is negative X. As long as our character's facing us, it means our mirror axis is set to X, and that is exactly what we want. So that's good. Let's go to the perspective camera. Let's see, number of fingers. So this is how we determine or dictate how many fingers our rig will have. So with my character, he has 1 less finger than a typical hand. So I would want to come in here and for my number of fingers, I'm going to key in 3 instead of 4, since I only have 3 fingers. There's a checkbox here for thumb. So you want to make sure that's turned on if your character has thumbs. I think everyone's does. Number of toes. So with your previous rig, I didn't require that anyone do toes for their for their character because it's very time consuming to set that up and to get it to work with the reverse foot setup for like ball roll and all that kind of stuff. If you really want to animate your toes or have that kind of articulation if your character has exposed toes, it's significantly easier and quicker to do it here in Setup Machine. So if you want to do that, you can. All you need to do is specify the number of toes you have. Now in terms of setting up those toes, I would just follow along with how I set up my hands because the setup for the toes is the same as the hands, more or less. So again, if you do want to build in toes, just key in how many you have there. But again, not a requirement. Build tail. So if your character has a tail, you can turn that on, and then we can position the widgets wherever our tail would be for that character. You just need to make sure that that's turned on. Number of segments. So this is really just dictated by the length of your tail. 4 is usually pretty good, but if you have a fairly lengthy tail, you might add a couple more segments to this. But usually 4 is a pretty good setup. I'm going to go ahead and turn build tail off because my character doesn't have one. And we can always add a tail later if we need to. Now, build eyes. I am going to rig my eyes onto joints onto the Setup Machine build. So I want to go ahead and make sure I turn on build eyes. And so once we get this all set up, as per our character here, I think these are all the options I'll need. Let's go ahead and hit OK. And then as soon as I hit OK, a dialog box is going to come up, and then this part is really important. Once that dialog box comes up, I don't want to touch the computer at all because Setup Machine is going to be running a script in the background. And if we start clicking around, there's a good chance we could screw up the script that it's running. And it may do a few things. It might crash. It might not build the rig at all or go corrupt. So I just want to hit OK and then let it do its thing until the dialog box disappears. So let's go ahead and hit OK. There's the dialog box, and let's just let it do its thing. All right, so the dialog box disappeared, and if I zoom out now, I should have sort of the skeletal system built up of widgets for our biped character. And then if you look over there in the outliner, there's just all kinds of junk that it added. So a bunch of group nodes and things like that that we don't want to touch. But once it's done, again, we'll get a series of these widgets. And so you're going to see here that all the body parts are kind of broken up by color. And then we have 2 types of widgets that we can select and manipulate. So if you'll notice here, the spine is green, our legs are this kind of magenta or pink color, our arms are blue, our fingers are yellow, our neck and head joints or widgets are red, and then the eyes are this kind of light blue color. Now, with the box widgets, so this kind of wireframe box or cubes, these are the primary widget that we use to move, scale, and rotate the widgets that are a part of that group. So in this case, if I were to grab this one, this would allow me to translate, scale, and rotate the spine. Down here for the feet, it's this big box here. So with these, we can, again, move, scale, and rotate them however we see fit. Now, there's another type of widget, and it's these joint widgets. So if you notice here, we have these little widgets that are for every joint in our body. So, we have a knee, ankle, ball, toe tip, and so forth. Now with these, we only ever want to translate these. We do not want to scale or rotate these at all. So just keep that in mind. We have 2 types of widgets, and so what I'll generally do is I'll start with the box widgets first, get everything in its initial position, and then once it's in the initial position, then I'll start fine-tuning the box or the joint widgets on their own. So let's start setting that up. And what I'm going to start with first is, it's way too big in comparison to the scale of my character. So we're going to need to scale the entire widget system down to conform a little bit better with my character. Now, there's 2 things we have to select to do this. One is the spine green widget or box widget here. So I'm going to select that green box. I'm also going to shift select this controller that looks like a home plate there. This will eventually become our root controller. So let's go ahead and shift select that. Now with these 2 things selected, that should allow us to move the entire rig like so, and we can also scale it down uniformly. I guess that's something else I should mention. When we're scaling these, we only ever want to scale uniformly. You never want to break the scale in any particular axis. We always want uniform scale. So I'm going to switch to the front orthographic camera real quick. Orthographic front. And I'm going to continue scaling this and translating it until I get this aligned with my character a little better. Now usually what I do, or sort of general rule of thumb, is I will scale this down until those upper leg joints kind of align in that area in the upper leg where they would be socketed. So I think that's actually pretty good. If I just kind of take a look there, I might scale it up just a little bit. So you can see there, those joints are kind of in the center of the leg. So I think that'll be pretty good in terms of scale. Now in terms of translation, I'm going to pull this up until the green widget box, or the spine widget box, is about where my hips would be. So I need to translate this up a little bit. And so I think that's about where I would want my hips to twist and rotate from. So I think that'll be okay. Let's switch to the side view. So I'm going to go to Panels, Orthographic Side. And then from the side view, I want the spines to go in the center of my character. So I'm going to push this back in Z so that that widget box there is in the center of my character. All right, so once we get that placed, we're all done with at least the that first spine controller. Now let's move on to the legs. So I like to place my legs first, and then I'll move up the rest of the body. And again, I always start with the widget, or the box widget control first. We'll position this, and then we will start to fine tune or adjust the individual joint widgets. Now, with this, I want it to be center, and then anything that's symmetrical, it should automatically mirror over. So you'll notice if I move this controller, it mirrors the whatever I do to this to the other leg. So let me undo that, and I'm going to switch to the front orthographic view. And I'm going to take this box widget and pull it down, and then over to the right a little bit so that it's closer to the center of my leg. And then let's move to the right view. And so the next thing I want to do is I want to position this box so that its pivot point is right on top of my ankle. So again, in that area in the foot there where we have those little bony knobs, there where our ankle would rotate from. So I'm going to ignore sort of the overall controller and the surrounding joints. I'm strictly looking at the pivot point for this box. And so I'm going to put that pivot point right there in the center of the ankle. Once we again get that initial position, let's deselect that, and now we can start moving the joint widgets into place. I'm going to start with this one here. So this tiny widget here on the back, this is actually where your heel will pivot from. So when we do like a heel lift and those sorts of things, this will lift from this point. And again, I'm just looking at the pivot point itself. So right there in the center of this joint, I want that pivot point to lie right there on that back corner of my foot. I might actually take my foot and go to Smooth Preview. And then let's take that joint and let's pull it down. I'm going to position it right there on that back heel. And so this is where I want it to rotate from. I might actually put it down just a little bit right there. The next one we'll do here is the ankle. So let's grab that there. Now something else I might do, so it starts to become an issue where I want to select the widget, but it accidentally selects the geometry. There's a couple ways you can go about turning off that geometry selection. If your geometry is in a display layer, just toggle this third box until it says R for render only. And that disables your ability to select it. Now, another way to do this is up here at the top, you can isolate or turn off selection types. And if I click this icon here that looks like 4 quads, it disables our ability to select polygons. All right, so now let's grab this ankle, and then I'm going to stick this joint widget here in the center of our ankle. Again, where the ankle would rotate from. This next one's going to be our ball. So I'm going to stick this in the center of the foot, right there where our ball rotation would happen. And then this is our toe tip. Now this is a little different than how we set up our rigs from scratch. So if you guys recall, the rigs from scratch, anytime we had a tip joint, we translated or moved that tip joint right outside of our character's geometry like this. With the setup machine, we're not going to do that. We're actually going to put it inside the geometry right at the tip. So I'm going to stick that right inside the front of the foot there, like so. So let's just keep moving up our leg. And so this next one is our knee. And so I'm going to drag this up to be in the center of my knee. And I'm going to pull it forward here a little bit, like so. And then this upper joint widget, this one goes in the center of our character, and then where, again, the upper leg or that bone would be socketed into the pelvis. So let's go ahead and stick that into place. We're just going to drag that up like so. Let's go to the front view and just double check this. So my character's legs are pretty straight. If you do need to, let's say, reposition these to be a little more centered to your leg or knee, you can move these over one at a time to kind of get those in place with your character's anatomy. But with my character, like I said, the leg's pretty straight, so I don't need to do that. You can even rotate this box. So let's say I know there's at least a couple models where the feet are kind of pointed away from the character or outwards. If you needed to match this overall with that rotation, just grab the box widget and in the Y-axis, rotate it so your feet are actually pointing in the direction, or the joint widgets are pointing in the same direction as your feet. But yeah, with mine, it's pretty straightforward, so I don't need to do that. All right, so that's our legs all taken care of. Let's move on to the spine. So the spine, again, is this series of green widgets. Now, before I do that, I want to move some of these others out of the way so they're not distracting. And so I'm going to shift select the arm widget here for just the left arm, and then I'm going to grab this red widget box for the neck/head, and we're going to yank these up out of the way. Like so. And then let's go to the right view and start positioning our spine. Now the spine's going to be a little different from how we set it up with the rig from scratch. So if you'll recall, again, the joints that we set up from the rig from scratch, we actually had them favor the back of our character. With these, I want to have them stick closer to the center of our character. The reason being is just because of how it puts in the controllers for the spine. It actually emanates from the center no matter what we do, so I would like them to be centered to our character so they're not favoring the back. And so let's just take these, and I'm going to take this and pull it just slightly above our root controller. So that's our first spine. This next one is going to be the center of our character, so I'm going to pull it up to be a little closer with the center mass of our character. So I'm kind of using my edge loops as a guideline for this. So I'm going to stick this on top of the next closest edge loop there for the center of our character. And then this last one, this one actually gets positioned somewhere right around or underneath the where the shoulder blade would be. So I'm going to pull this up somewhere right around in here. Or you could think of it as the kind of the start of your upper back. So this edge loop here would kind of be the start of my upper back, where we'd have a little more rigidity. And I might push this back just a little bit, like so. All right, so that's our spine all set up. Let's do the head. I'm going to take these and just push them out a little bit to get them out of the way. So the head is comprised of three things here. So we've got the box widget and then two additional joints here. Now with this box widget, we want to position this at the base of the neck where the neck meets the shoulders. And I'm going to do this from the side view. And again, as I'm moving this widget, I'm looking at the pivot point because I want the pivot point to actually be right there at the base of the neck, in the center of the neck. Once we get that in place, I'm going to move on to the next widget joint. Now this one is for the base of the head where the head meets the neck. And again, I want this to be in the center of the neck. So let's take this and push it down. And again, I'm looking at that pivot point, and that pivot point should align right there where the base of the head meets the neck, like so. And then this one up here is just a head tip joint. This is what we're going to most likely parent our rigid geometries to, the ones that don't get skinned. So let's go ahead and just push this straight up. I'm going to turn on X-ray mode, and I'm going to push it up here to the top of my character's skull. Then we have the eye controls. So I'm going to grab this box here, the box widget for the eyes, and we'll push these forward. And so you want these to be in the center of the eye. So you could do this manually by hand like this and just kind of eyeball it. Or if your eye is modeled similar to mine, we can point snap it to that vertex there on the center of the eyeball. So I'm going to hold the V key and left click and drag here and snap it right to there, that center vertex, like so. And then I'm going to switch to the side view, orthographic side. I'm going to turn on X-ray mode, and then I want this box widget to be in the center of the eyeball itself. So I'm going to push this back. Until it's mostly center with the eyeball there. I don't think anyone modeled their eyes as NURBs. If you did, delete them and model them as a polygon object. The reason why is we need to skin it, and because the eyes work on skinning for this rig, and so you're going to need a polygon geometry instead. All right, so once we get that initial box in place, what we're going to do now is take these tips here in the front of our eye. So this widget joint here, wherever we position these, this is where our actual controllers will be in space. So I'm going to pull these out here in front of our character like so. And it's going to place our eyeball controls way out here in the front, which is exactly what I want. All right, let's see. So that's our head. Actually, we've got one last thing to do to the head. So by default, your biped doesn't come with a jaw controller, and we're going to have to create one from scratch. So let's come up here to TSM3. We'll go to create parts, and if you look in here, there isn't actually a jaw part. Let me go in here into head and see. No. So by default, we don't get an option for a jaw. But if you look here at the very bottom, there's a single control. So we can make our own this way. And so I'm going to go to single control, and then in here select single control. If we do this mirrored part option, it's going to basically treat it similar to our arms or legs, where it creates a mirrored object, which we don't want. We just want one controller. So I'm going to go ahead and click single control. Once it's done, it's going to create this larger purple box widget. Let's go ahead and grab this, and I'm going to scale it. I'm going to translate it and scale it. So let's make it a little smaller here. Let's go to the orthographic side view. And we're going to position this where we want our jaw to rotate from. So again, that's where that jawbone hinges into the skull there. So somewhere right about there should be good. And then we need to attach it to the rig. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go to perspective, and to attach it to our rig, what we'll want to do is select the joint widget, not the box, but the actual joint. So I'm going to click on that, and then I need to select the second joint here in the head. So again, this first one is your neck. The second one is the first head joint. So I will shift select the head joint like so, and then let's go up to TSM3, and then go to attach body parts. Now once you do that, you'll notice a line now emanates from that single joint that I created to the head joint. And so that should follow along with the head once I create the rig. All right, so that's all set up for the head. Let's move on to the arms now. So this first box widget for the arm, this is your clavicle, and you position this the same way you would for your clavicle on the other rig. So I'm going to stick it inside the body. Inside the chest here, and I might pull it forward just a little bit like so. All right, let's start positioning the arm now. I might actually take this clavicle and push it down a little bit so that the joints here for the arm are aligned a little closer to the center. And then let's start pushing these into place. So this is our shoulder or upper arm. And so I want to start putting these in the center of our arm like so. So I'm going to push that in towards the center and above the armpit. Let's grab this next one. And so this is our elbow. So I'm going to push it back until it's mostly in the center of our arm. And then I'm going to push it forward here in X so that it is in the center of the elbow there, or the joint. So that's good. Let's move on to the hand. Now the hand, it has a widget control and a joint that we need to select to move the entire hand. So I'm going to grab the widget box and the widget joint, and then with both of these selected, I'm going to move these forward and back. And I want these to be in the center of the wrist where we expect the wrist to rotate from. And this I could probably push down like so, because I want it to be in the center of the wrist. Let me actually take the elbow and push it down as well to be a little closer to the center of the arm. All right, and believe it or not, we're almost done. We just got the fingers left. So with the fingers, they will each have their widget box and then the individual joints that comprise the knuckles in your fingers. With these, so again, you'll use the box to position it and rotate it in place initially, and then we will translate the widget joints themselves. And so I'm going to grab this first box here for the pinky, and I'm going to pull it forward and over, and we're going to stick this box in the center of our finger. Now, again, the key difference between this and our original rig that we set up, instead of having these joints positioned towards the top of the finger or hand, I want them to be in the very center. So I'm going to go ahead and put that mostly in the center of the finger there. And then we're going to use rotation on this, so I'm going to rotate it in Y to match the angle of the finger, like so. And then I might rotate it down in Z a little bit to match the downward angle of the finger, just like so. And then we can start positioning the individual joints. Now, one thing I'd recommend you do before you start translating these, grab it, and if you look at your move tool, if it's not aligned in the same direction as the joint or widget itself, what we're going to need to do is change your move tool settings to be object instead of world space. So I'm going to come over here and double click on my move tool, and here for the axis orientation, let's switch it from world to object, and now my move tool will match. And so with this, I would only move it in X. Sometimes you can move it up and down in Y, but I would definitely never move it side to side in Z. So I wouldn't do this because you're going to create some weird rotations and bends in your finger that we want to avoid. Now, when I start positioning these after I get the initial box in place, what I like to do is immediately skip to the tip and pull it out so that it's just inside the fingertip, like so. And then I'll move to the next joint, and I'm going to push this to be in the center of the first knuckle there. And then I will grab this one and position it to be in the center knuckle. And that finger's all good to go. Now, like I said, if you needed to, I could grab these and push them down in Y as needed. But I feel like my angle's pretty good there. My fingers aren't really curled or bent. But something else you'll notice, with each of these fingers, there's this arrow emanating from the center knuckle. This is to indicate the top of your finger. So my character's hands were modeled pretty flat, and so I don't really need to rotate the box at all. But if your finger is modeled at an angle, what you'll want to do is grab the widget box and then in X, rotate it so that that arrow is pointing towards the top of your finger. So again, you only have to do that if your fingers aren't modeled flat like mine. And so it's the same process. I'm going to repeat the same process for the next two fingers here. I'm going to get this one out of the way because it's a little distracting there. And so I'm going to position this in the center of the first knuckle, and then I'm going to pull this up and try to get it in the center of the finger. And then let's rotate it in Y to match that angle here from the top. And then let's rotate it down in Z to match the downward angle, or the tilted angle of the finger. And then let's start transitioning these or positioning them into place. I'm going to grab that tip and stick it right inside the fingertip. And then we'll grab this one and stick it in the center of that knuckle. And let's grab this one and stick it in the center of the center finger knuckle there. And that should be good. And let's grab the last one here and do the same thing. All right, and the last thing we need to do is our thumb. And so I'm going to grab that widget box for our thumb, and just like our fingers, there is this arrow that emanates here from that center joint. And again, we need this to face the top of your thumb. So my character wasn't modeled anatomically correct, and his thumb is flat. If you did model yours correctly, your thumb is going to be at a slight angle. And again, really the most important part is that that arrow is pointing towards the top of your thumb. So if it is at an angle, you'd want to rotate this box to match that angle. So that arrow should just point out the top of your thumb. So in my case, I actually need that thumb or that arrow to point straight up. So I'm going to rotate this in X so that arrow is pointing mostly up. And then I'm going to position this widget box somewhere near where the cup joint would be. And then let's rotate this to match in Y. And then I'm going to rotate it down in Z to match the angle of our finger here. I'm going to push that down so those are mostly towards the center of the thumb. And then I'm going to start positioning the joint widgets. So I'm going to take this one and throw it there at the front of the thumb. This one's going to be that next knuckle right there. And then this one's going to be this last knuckle right there. And that's it. So this is all set up and ready for rigging. Now, before we finalize this rig, I'm going to save this. Once we tell it to rig, there's no going back. So it is a permanent destructive sort of edit to this rig. If I were to save this, it would be nice if I had a version where I can always go back to the widgets so I don't have to reset them up. You can technically hit rig and then hit undo, and it will undo the rigging, and then you'll have all of your widgets back, but all the widgets will be disconnected from one another and they will not work. So I'd recommend just saving this real quick, and so you'll always have a widget version. Let's see here. So let's go to File, Save As, and here at the end I'm going to replace out the word Start, and I'm going to call it Widgets, and hit Save, and hit Continue. And this way I always have a version I can come back to before I finalize the rig. And yeah, so now we're ready to actually rig. Now, before we can rig it, we have to tell the setup machine what geometry needs to be skinned. So this should be all the same geometry that you did on the other rig. So anything you skinned to the other rig would be the same here. The one difference is we need to include our eyeball geometry because it gets skinned to the joints inside the eyeball. So let's go ahead and shift select everything. So I'm going to grab the head. Oh, I need to turn on my geometry selection again. Let's grab the head, the body, both feet, and like I said, the primary difference between this and the other rig is I also need to include the eyes. So let's go ahead and grab those. But the hair, the eyebrows, the tongue, or anything inside the mouth, I'm not going to include. So that will be separate. With everything selected, let's go up here to TSM3. Let's go down to Set Character Geometry. It looks like nothing happened, but if you go to your outliner and scroll all the way to the bottom, there should now be a group node labeled TSM3 Character Geometry. And if you click the plus symbol next to it, it's going to have all of the geometry that you had selected. It's going to add it to this list. And so now we're ready to rig. Let's go back to that TSM3 menu. And down towards the bottom, there's this rig option. Now again, just like before when we set up the biped, this is one of those things where when I click this to finalize the rig, I'm going to let the dialog box pop up and let it finish its thing before I touch anything else because we might break the rig or the script. So let's go ahead and hit rig. Here in this dialog box where it says set rig options, let's click on that. And by default, this should already be set up this way, but I would just double check it. So we want high res, spine, arm, and leg. It's really great or useful for the squash and stretch that puts on the rig. So we're going to leave that. And then where it says spine, hip joint, we're going to include the hip joint. So that's fine, but just check to make sure the defaults are still there. We'll hit OK. Down below where it says bind method, this is just the skinning method that it uses. We're going to use the smooth bind just like what we did with the original rig. Max influences dictates how it distributes the influences based on the joints and the surrounding vertices or geometry. I'm going to kick this down a little bit. I'm going to kick it down to 3 instead of 5. And now let's hit rig. And so it's going to pop up this dialog box, and I'm not going to touch anything in fear of breaking the plugin. And this does take about a minute or so, so we'll give it some time. Oh, actually, it kicked it up fairly quickly. So once it's done, that dialog box will disappear, and we now have a series of controllers, and our character's already skinned and ready to animate. So if I grab, let's say, this home plate or the root controller there, and move it, my character should move along with it. If I grab the foot controller down here, the foot moves along with it, and everything functions pretty much like our rig from scratch, so it has all the same controllers. They might be positioned or they look a little different, but they all have the same functionality. Some of the key differences is with our legs, for example, we don't have those pull vectors out in front of our knees or those locator nodes. It's actually these arrows, so if you click on these arrows, it's based on rotation. So if I grab these and rotate them, this is how we control where our knees are pointed. What else is different? This home plate icon, so the root. If you look at that inside there, this is where all your IK, FK switches are. So if you look down this list, there's a left arm, right arm. There's head rotation, so you can actually toggle the head lock on, kind of similar to Alfred, if you recall from that rig. So we can either make the head follow the spine or lock on its own. At the bottom here, the one I definitely want to change right off the bat is the spine IK FK switch. More often than not, I animate the spine in FK, and by default this rig is set up with IK, so I'm going to come in here and toggle this to 0 to turn it into an FK spine. Let's see, the feet. So the feet controllers, the primary is this box down here. Now this has all the same options that we expect to see out of a foot controller. So if you look over there, you have a heel raise, heel swivel, toe raise, and all that kind of stuff. So this is how we get those types of functions out of our feet. There is a squash and stretch on this, but you got to be careful with it because yeah, we can go way beyond the scale value that we'd probably want for our character's rig and then break the foot. Yeah, all of our feet controllers are there, and as we would expect them to be. The World Con. So if we select this, this does have some different options that we maybe don't get out of our other rig. So you'll notice here, some of my controllers I can't see. The spine, I can't see my controllers for the spine, neck, head. We don't know it yet, but there's actually some eyeball controllers that are hidden. Our finger controls might be hard to see. Let me go ahead and take a look here. Let me actually just turn off the geometry so you can see this. So the finger controls are right here, but they're so small I can't see them or select them. The spine controls are here. Again, they're so small I can't see or select them. But if we come into our World Con and take a look, there are adjustments here so we can adjust the size of these controllers. So I'm going to start here with the fingers, and I'm going to select all of the fingers so that we get them all at once. And so I'm going to grab the left finger 1, 2, 3, right finger 1, 2, 3. Down below, I will control select the left and right thumbs. And then let's scale these up. And you'll notice as I increase the value there, these controllers get bigger so I can see them more easily and select them. Same thing with the spine. So I would like to be able to see and select those. So let's see if there's a spine control in here. And there is right there. So let's take that and increase that until I can actually see and select these and rotate them into place. And so you could probably correct most of these just through this this con down here. Let's see, I need my head. So let's take the head controller and increase it in size until I can see that. You notice when I do this one, it also automates the neck. So I just want to scale this up so that I can see both. The clavicles are terrible usually. I've never gotten a good solve out of the clavicles, and so that's something we're going to have to fix by hand. But let me just check and see if there's anything I can fix first without doing it by hand. I really think that's it. Let me go ahead and save this. So I'm going to go to File, Save Scene As. I'm going to delete out that word widgets, and let's call this, let's call it kid, or crawl Zachary kid underscore AutoRig version 1, and hit save. And then I want to see if I can fix these controls. Now, if you were to, let's say, select one of these controls, so I'm going to do the spine here real quick. So if I grab the spine and try to move it, you'll notice we can't move it and still maintain frozen transforms without it affecting the rig. So we're not going to be able to grab the controller directly to change its size or whatever. So let me undo that. What we're going to need to do is we're going to need to do this on a component level. So we're going to have to select the vertices and move the vertices. And when we do that, we can actually change the scale and rotation of the controls without affecting their position or their original position or their frozen transformations. So I'm going to turn off my geometry for now. My clavicle controls are these two circles here in the front and these two in the back that are almost intersecting one another. I'm going to isolate them. And I'm going to right click and go to Control Vertex. You'll notice when I do that once, it puts everything here on this side in the vertex mode. I need to do that again so it does it to this other side. So let's right click and go to Control Vertex. And then I only want to select the vertices here for the clavicles. So these two circles in front and these two here in back. And then I want to rotate them away from one another. So I'm going to bring up the Rotate tool. I'm going to double click on the Rotation tool and reset its settings. And then over here, I need to change its rotation center from default to object. And then you'll notice when I rotate these, they rotate away from each other and they stay symmetrical. And so I'm going to turn my geometry back on so I can see this. And I really just want these sort of in front of the chest and behind the back. With these vertices still selected, I'm going to use the translation. And I'm going to move them. Now, again, you'll notice here, if I look at the Move tool, it's actually averaging between all of the selected components. And so I don't want to do this based off of object. I want to do it in world space. So I'm going to double click on my Move tool and switch the axis orientation from object to world. And then let's push these back like so they're a little more evenly distributed. If you needed these further away from each other, I could go to the Scale tool and change its axis orientation from object to world. And then if we scale this out in Z, you can see they will scale away from the body if we need them a little further away. You could do the same thing with your arm controllers. So if you wanted maybe a little more control over how these look, let's say I wanted my shoulder to be a little bigger. I'm going to select all the vertices here for the shoulder controller. And you'll notice I'm avoiding trying to select the, the joint. So I'm going to grab all of these, and then I want to do this symmetrically, so I'm going to grab the verts on the other shoulder controller. And then I'm going to turn my geometry back on just so I can see how this is going to be affected. I'm going to go back to the Scale tool options, and again where it says Scale Center, I want to make sure it's from the center of the object, not the center of world space. And then we can scale these up, and they should scale from their respective pivots. Let me go ahead and save this. The spines. Now the spines are different. You cannot select these in component mode and scale them because they will break. I'm not sure why. It's got to have something to do with how they're connected to the script. Let me break these real quick and show you what will happen. So I'm going to isolate this and go to Control Vertex mode. And then I'm going to start scaling these uniformly. So when I start to scale this uniformly, it doesn't actually scale uniformly. Well, it kind of does, but what it's doing is it's starting to tilt it outwards, which isn't what I want. Sometimes when you do this, if I hit undo, it doesn't go back into place. So that time it did, but I can't always guarantee that it will. So with these, we can't actually scale them on component mode, at least not like we normally would. Let me go back here. Yeah, let's isolate this. And so instead, what I'll do is I'll select all these vertices. And instead of manipulating the vertices themselves, what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a cluster to these, and I'm going to use the cluster to control the scale, position, and rotation of the controller. So let's go up here to Deform. Let's go ahead and apply a cluster to all these vertices. And then I'm going to open up the outliner because it's a little easier to see and select the cluster from here. So down here towards the bottom, we have that cluster. And then if I unisolate my geometry here, I can grab that cluster and scale this controller now. I can rotate it to maybe match my character a little better. And I can also translate it. So if I want it maybe a little lower or higher, I can now use this cluster to do this. And then once you're done, what we'll do is we'll select the spine and then go up to Edit, Delete by Type. Not all. If you do all, it'll break your rig. Let's go by Type, History. and it's going to delete that cluster off there, but we should still be able to select the controller, have it maintain its position and scale and all that, and its transformations are still frozen, and it still manipulates the rig like we would expect it to. So again, as far as I know, that's only for the spine that you need to do that with. Everything else should be okay. Let's go ahead and fix the eyes now. So I like the eye controllers to be a little further away. So I'm going to grab all the 3 eye controllers here. I'm going to right click and go to Control Vertex 3 times until I can see all of the vertices for the eyes. I'm going to grab all those vertices in a marquee selection, and let's add these to a cluster deformation. And then I'm going to grab that cluster node, and I'm going to position these a little further away from my character, like so. And then let's grab these controllers and delete their history. So we'll go to Edit, Delete by Type, History. Get that cluster off there. And then I want the pivots to be center to the controller. So I'm going to grab the main controller. I'm going to hold D and V and drag that pivot towards the controller there on the Z axis. And then I'll do the individual eye controls by selecting them and going to Modify Center Pivot. So the center pivot only works on the individual controls. It does not work on the main one. So that's why I had to hold D and V for that one instead. Now, this should control my entire character's eyes. Now, don't be alarmed, my face rips off, but it should work just like the other rig that we set up by hand. So if I grab the main control and rotate it, the eyes will point. We'll fix that here in a second. The eyes will point at this. And then if I grab the individual controls, we get individual control over the eyes. That looks very painful. Now, there's one additional eye control we get with this setup that we don't get out of the manual setup. So if I hide the rig here, or the geometry, we get these 2 little circles here. These actually allow you to control the rotation of the eyes independently from the main eye control out there. So let's go ahead and shift select both of these and right click and go to Control Vertex. I need to do it twice. And then let's grab these verts. Let's turn our geometry back on, and I'm going to pull these out in front of my character's face, like so. I might scale them down. I don't know if I want them to be this huge. So I'm going to go back to the scale option, and I'm going to switch it to Scale Center from Object. Let's do Axis Orientation also to... Nah, let's leave that on World, and then let's scale these down. You don't necessarily have to do this, but you do at least want to pull them forward so you can actually see and select them. Let's see, what else do we have to fix here? I think that's it for the most part. Oh, the jaw. So the jaw we can't see, so I'm going to go ahead and toggle the geometry off. And I'm going to grab the jaw controller right there. We'll isolate it. We'll go to vertex mode and grab it. Let's turn our geometry back on. And then I'm going to do this from the right view. I'll turn on X-ray mode. And I'm just going to yank this in front of my chin, like so. And I'm going to save this real quick. And so we just want to fine tune and tweak all of our controllers until they're easy to see and select. I might actually take these and make them a little smaller real quick. And so you'll want to do this when you're cleaning up your rig, just to make sure, again, we can easily see and select all of your controllers and manipulate the character as needed. The last thing we want to do is clean up the skinning. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole skinning process again. I'm only going to maybe do a fingertip just so you can see it, and then I'll do the head because the eyes are a little bit different to set up. But in terms of the body, the legs, the arms, it's all the same in terms of how you distribute the weight and how you start it. So you'll start at the feet and work your way up the legs, and then from the fingertips up the arms. You'll do the head and then work your way through the chest. So it's exactly the same. The only difference is if I were to grab, let's say, my leg here and right click and go to paint skin weights, You'll notice you'll have more joints to factor in here, and you want to paint the weights to align with the surrounding geometry. But you'll notice, let's say for your leg, you have a upper leg, a twist, a lower leg, and so forth. So you're going to have a few more joints than you would normally have in your leg. But let me go ahead and let's clean up a finger, and then we'll fix our head. And so I'm going to come over here and take a look. So you do want to go through all of your primary joints. You know, by default, the skinning you get is pretty solid out of Setup Machine. I think really the only problem with this is I think the face still rips off. Oh, actually, that works pretty well. But you do want to check all of your joints and how they bend. So I know at least in the last class when I bent my finger, yeah, the top of the knuckle looks pretty good, but the bottom crease isn't that great. So you want to go in and clean these up a little bit so we do get that nice defined crease in areas like the fingers, the elbow, the knees, the underarm. We want to make sure our armpit area doesn't collapse. We want to clean up the areas like where the neck meets the head and then the neck meets the body. So we want to have very defined sort of creases or paint weights there. Like I said, it's pretty much the same process as the other rig. So I'm going to grab this finger here, or this geometry, and go to paint skin weights. And then I'm going to go look for the finger. Now this is one of the downsides of the AutoRig, is you don't really get control over what the stuff is named. So I have to kind of find where the joints are for the finger and click through these. So it just says left finger 1, but I don't know which finger that is until I click on it and look. So that's the pinky and not the finger I want. So I'm going to keep going here until I get my fingertip for my index. And so the skinning works, it's the exact same. So in terms of this, I want to grab that joint 3, which is my fingertip, and I want 100% influence on all the surrounding geometry up to where that crease or that knuckle happens. So let's go ahead and with this joint selected, paint 100% influence here. On the underside, I like to paint this up to the center of the crease. So 100% influence. I want to make sure I get these tips here. Cool. On the top there, I want to make sure I grab all these verts here for the top knuckle. So again, we should have 3 edge loops going around that area. So I just want to make sure I hit all the vertices associated with those edge loops. Maybe even on the side here a little bit. And then I don't want anything after this. So I'm going to hold control. I'm going to paint out the rest of the finger there that's not part of that knuckle. Because I don't want this to control that much of the finger. And then the crease, so like I said, I usually only paint it up to the center of the crease. So I'm going to remove this influence here. And then let's smooth this out. So I'm going to come in here and hold shift and just tap right around in there and smooth that. And then I'm just going to lightly tap in here in the crease. So I'm going to click once there and there. And then let's test it. So let's grab that, actually I'm going to smooth this. I'm going to grab that controller and rotate it. Now I get a nice kind of bend on top, and it maintains that defined crease on the inner part of the finger. So at this point, we would just continue this all the way up the finger, and then do all the fingers, and then move our way up the hand, so the wrist, elbow, and so forth. So again, skinning's pretty similar, straightforward, and you may not even have to really touch anything. Like that wrist looks pretty good. If anything, I might just I would go to the wrist joint and maybe remove some of the influence from the forearm. But other than that, I think that wrist is pretty good. The elbow, I think, does collapse on itself. Yeah, so the back side of it's okay, but I would like to maintain a little bit more of a crease there. So let's go find that elbow real quick. Yeah, apparently I already passed it. Oh, there it is. Where the hell's that joint? And again, I do want it to maintain this crease, so I'm going to hold control, and on the other side here, remove the influence here on the other part of the arm or the bicep. I actually want to add some of this in and smooth it on that back part of the elbow so we get a smoother transition. And then that should give me a little bit better of a crease there. Yeah. So with this one, it might just be a little bit of touch-up. You may not have a whole lot of work to do. With the head, we definitely do. So it really depends on how your character's set up. Now, I'm going to pretend like my geometry is all one piece. So some of you might have that situation. You'll still want to select that geometry and isolate it. And then we'll right-click and go to Paint Weights. And we're going to go find that head joint. And so it always takes me a second to dig through this and find it. So head joint 1. And let me unisolate this just so you can see where that joint's at. So again, it's that joint right there that's highlighted in blue. And again, this is that joint that aligns with the base of our skull where it meets the neck. And so you would want to paint 100% influence to this joint on everything from that joint up on your geometry. So again, wherever your skull, your head meets the neck, we would want 100% influence. And so if your character is all one piece, you can't hit the flood button because it's going to give 100% influence to your entire body, which we don't want. We only want the head. So you would have to sit here and manually paint it by hand. I might isolate this so it's a little easier to see. And so we would come through with this 100% influence and paint this whole head. Now, my head is separate, so it's a little easier for me because what I can do is hit flood, and it's just going to flood my entire head. And then if I were to, let's say, grab my head control and rotate it, it should follow there with the head, so that's exactly what I want. Now let's go grab our jaw controller, and let's just rotate it down slightly in X, like so. And so this is actually exactly the same as what we did with the original rig. So I'm going to grab my geometry, I'm going to go to Paint Skin Weights, I'm going to go locate that jaw controller. Now this is again one of the downsides to this is because it doesn't let me rename that single joint, we're looking for a generically titled single joint 1. So I just need to go find that. It actually should be under the head. And so right there we have that single joint 1, and it's the same. So I'm going to start painting 100% influence from the chin, and as I paint from the chin, I'm going to move my brush up towards the bottom lip. So I'm going to left click and drag and try to pull that mouth away, and it's going to match the location of my jaw controller. And I'm trying to avoid getting that upper lip, so let me undo that. We want to make sure we grab, the underjaw here and the cheek. I'm going to try to get inside the mouth. I have to decrease the radius there to avoid the upper lip. I want to make sure I get the bottom part of the mouth sac as well. So I'm going to come in here and try to hit on that. And then up to the sort of center line there on the inside of the mouth. And then I would like to blend this so there's a smoother transition there in the corners of the mouth. So I'm going to hit 3 to go to my smooth preview. And then I'm going to hold shift and smooth that out. I'm going to smooth this on up into the cheek a little bit. I definitely want to smooth back here because I don't want that hard transition. So I'll have it smooth into the chin a little bit better. And we'll grab the other cheek as well. And then once we're done, we should have a mouth we can open and close. Yeah. You can go beyond the rotation, so we probably would never go beyond 0 or whatever. But we've got a mouth that we can open and close now. Let's go ahead and zero that out. Let's fix the eyes. So right now, well, actually, they probably do work, but not that great. So let me undo that. And what we need to do is fix their skin weights. So I'm going to start here with the left eye. I'm just going to grab the geometry, right click, and go to vertex mode. I'm going to double click on any vertex, it doesn't matter which. And when you double click, it should select every vertex in that eye. And then let's go up to Windows, General, Editors, and let's go down to Component Editor. Let's go to the Smooth Skins tab. And what we're looking for here are the eyeball joints. And what I want to do is add 100% influence to the left eye joint. So here it says left eye. Let's go ahead and click on that first value. Let's scroll all the way to the bottom. Hold Shift on our keyboard and click that last value at the bottom. I'm going to key in a 1 and hit Enter. And it's going to give 100% influence to that eye joint, to the eyeball geometry. Now let's do the same thing for the other eye. I'm going to grab it, right click, go to Vertex, double click. In the component editor, under Smooth Skins, we're going to assign influence to the right eye now. So there's the right eyeball joint. Let's click on the first value, scroll all the way to the bottom, hold Shift, click on the last value, key in a 1, hit Enter. And that's all done. Let's go test this out. So I should be able to grab my main eye control and move it. Both eyes should follow. And then if I grab the individual controls, the individual eyes will rotate and point at the individual eye control. And then we have the controls out here right in front of the eyes, and these are based on rotation as opposed to translation. So this will give you individual control over each eye in this way. Cool. And so that's really it to this rig. Like I said, I'm not going to do all the skinning because it's the same as the previous rig. I guess the last thing I would need to do is parent the rest of my objects, the rigid objects, to the rig so they follow along. So right now when I grab, let's say, the root here and move it down, the hair doesn't follow. So let's go ahead and parent that. So I'm going to grab the hair and both eyebrows, and then I'm going to parent them to this first head joint, which is this one right here. So I'll hold Shift and click on that. And then with both of those things selected, let's go up here to, or actually let's just hit P to parent. Parent those. And then everything inside your mouth. So anything that is at the bottom part or in the jaw gets parented to the jaw joint. Everything that's in the top of the mouth gets parented to that same head joint that I just parented the hair to. So I only have a tongue, so I'm going to select the tongue. Now the jaw is a little weird because with this setup machine, we don't have the tip joints like we set up ourselves. So I might be tempted to click on the joint here, but you'll notice when I select it, it actually highlights all the joints that are part of the head. So it's doing the third head joint at the top and then both of the eye joints. It's not what we want. So let me undo that. And what we actually need to select is just this little joint all by itself right here. So that's the actual jaw joint. And then with both of those things selected, I'm going to hit P to parent. And then let's test this out. So if I rotate the head, the hair, and the eyebrows should follow. And then if I open the mouth, the tongue should follow the jaw. Cool. All right, so that's all done and ready to go. Let's save this. I'm going to go File, Save Scene As. And I'm going to save this as Final. So let's see, Craws, Acri, Kid, Rig, _ Final, and save. And so it's all ready to go. So I'm not going to require that you set up a high-res, low-res switch to this. You could if you wanted, and it would be exactly the same as the other rig. So you would smooth your geometry and then create an attribute on the WorldCon and attach those. Like I said, I'm not going to require it. You just need a fully rigged character that's rigged and skinned and ready to go. The rest of today will be work day. There's not a whole lot of time left, but the last 20 minutes or so, will be work time. Due for Monday, so a week from today. I'll answer your questions in a minute. A week from today, 2 rigs are due. So what I would like you to turn in on November 11th, you're going to turn in both of your project folders. So you should have a AutoRig folder and then a standard rig folder, both of which you'll turn in. Inside of your normal rig folder, what I would like you to do is under scenes, I only want your final rig. I don't want all of your different iterations. I don't need all that. I just need your final rig. And then I would do it in a separate scene file, but your walk cycle. So do not do your walk cycle in the same file as your final rig, because you always need a default rig to default back to, if that makes sense. But I don't need all of your other iterations, so get those cleaned out of there. And then I would like a play blast of your basic walk cycle, and that play blast should go here into the movies folder. And it doesn't have to be the world's greatest walk cycle, just a plain walk cycle, 24 frames, so that I can see that your character skinning is working well and that your rig can actually be used for animation. So that'll be for that rig. And then for the other rig, you'll turn in a project folder labeled AutoRig. And in here, under scenes, you should have just your final AutoRig. And then I would also like your widgets. So you'll have 2 files there, so the final and the widgets. And then I don't require a walk cycle for this one, so just turn in the final rig, and you'll be good to go there. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I'm forgetting. Oh, when some of you are emailing me your rigs to look at, when I open them up, it says that your model or your geometry was referenced into the scene. And so when I open it, because I don't have the original model, it just shows the rig and your geometry is not there. So if you did reference your geometry in, you're going to need to include your actual geometry file in here. Otherwise, when I go to grade it, I won't see your geometry and I won't know if your skinning is working. So please make sure that that is included if you did reference the geometry into your scene file. But yeah, I'll stop here. Rest of today's workday. Wednesday's a workday, Friday's a workday, and then everything is due at the beginning of class on Monday.